It was an announcement that sounded to most ears like bureaucratic housekeeping, a funding commitment for a remote railway in northern Manitoba. But in the frosty air of Winnipeg in November 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Premier Wab Kinew were not just talking about tracks and ties. They were unveiling a quiet act of economic secession. With a combined federal and provincial investment of $262 million, Canada declared it would rebuild the long-neglected Hudson Bay Railway to the highest continental standard, Class 1. This single decision transforms a forgotten, struggling line into a sovereign trade artery, a direct pipeline from the Canadian heartland to the global market that deliberately and permanently bypasses the United States. For over a century, Canada's economic sovereignty has had a glaring geographical flaw. The riches of the prairies, the endless waves of grain, the mountains of potash, the rivers of critical minerals have flowed south by default. They traveled on American railroads to American ports like Seattle, Portland, and Duluth, where they were loaded onto ships by American companies paying American fees. Even when the final destination was Europe or Asia, Canadian exports took a mandatory detour through the United States. This was not a choice born of efficiency, but of a lack of alternatives. It made Canada's export economy a captive to American logistics, subject to their delays, their costs, and increasingly, their political whims. Every ton of Saskatchewan wheat that moved through Minnesota was a ton of leverage handed to Washington. The Hudson Bay Railway, stretching 1,300 kilometers from the Pas to the Arctic port of Churchill, was supposed to be the answer to this vulnerability. But for decades, it was a symbol of national ambition humbled by brutal reality. Now, under the pressure of an unpredictable American administration and guided by a prime minister determined to assert Canadian independence, this railway is being resurrected as a strategic weapon. It is the physical manifestation of Carney's promise to diversify trade and reclaim control, and it leaves the United States, which long ignored this corridor as a frozen relic, suddenly blindsided as Canada prepares to reroute hundreds of billions in trade away from its grasp. The story of the Hudson Bay Railway is a story of brilliant promise and heartbreaking failure. Conceived in an era of bold nation-building, its logic was impeccable on a map. For a prairie farmer, the shortest route to the great markets of Europe was not west to crowded Vancouver or south through the American labyrinth, but straight north to Churchill on Hudson Bay. From there, ships could sail directly across the Atlantic. It promised to liberate the Canadian West from foreign tolls and give birth to a truly national trade corridor. Construction began in the 1920s, a heroic struggle against some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Engineers battled perpetually shifting permafrost, vast, waterlogged muskeg that swallowed equipment, and Arctic cold that could snap steel. When the final spike was driven in 1929, it was a triumph of will, but almost immediately the dream began to crack. The very ground the railway was built on refused to hold still. Seasonal thawing turned the subsurface into slurry, causing tracks to sink, twist, and wash away in spring floods. Maintenance was a constant, losing battle against nature itself. The port of Churchill, while ice-free for a precious few months each summer, was limited and remote. For shippers operating on razor-thin margins and strict schedules, the southern route through the U.S., though longer and more expensive in fees, was predictable. The northern route was a gamble. By the late 20th century, the Canadian government, weary of the endless financial drain, wanted out. In a move that spoke volumes about its perceived worth, the railway and port were sold in 1997 to the American company Omnitrax for the symbolic price of $1. The era of national ambition was over. The era of managed decline had begun. Under private, foreign ownership, investment dried up. Maintenance was deferred, and the line slowly decayed. Then, in 2017, catastrophic flooding severed the railway entirely. The town of Churchill, reliant on the line for fuel and supplies, was stranded. The railway that was to connect Canada to the world could not even sustain the community at its terminus. It was the lowest point in its history. Salvation came from an unexpected direction. In 2018, a coalition of 41 First Nations and northern Manitoba municipalities, recognizing the line's vital role for their communities, banded together to buy it back, forming the Arctic Gateway Group. To most outside observers, this was a noble but ultimately local story. Indigenous communities taking stewardship of a broken piece of infrastructure. The idea that this battered line could ever challenge continental trade flows was considered a fantasy. It was a railway running on grit and hope, not a strategic national asset. Two seismic shifts changed that calculation. The first was political. The return of Donald Trump to the White House brought with it a renewed storm of trade threats and tariffs. The weaponization of economic policy was no longer a theoretical risk. It was a daily reality. For Canada, the peril of having 75% of its exports funneled through a hostile or capricious United States became an existential vulnerability. The second shift was the election of Mark Carney, a prime minister whose central mission was to build Canadian economic independence. He looked at the map not with the eyes of a 20th century accountant seeing a liability, but with the vision of a 21st century strategist seeing leverage. The Hudson Bay Railway was no longer just a line to Churchill. It was a potential escape hatch. The November 2025 announcement of $262 million in funding was the trigger for this transformation. This was not a patch-up job. This was a wholesale, technological rebirth of the railway to Class 1 standards. In the North American rail industry, Class 1 is the gold standard. It means the track can handle the heaviest unit trains, mile-long strings of cars carrying tens of thousands of tons, at higher speeds with maximum reliability. Achieving this on the Hudson Bay Line is an engineering declaration of war on the problems that defeated it before. The reconstruction is tackling the permafrost with modern geotechnical solutions, specialized bedding, drainage systems, and monitoring technology designed to stabilize the track bed. Outdated rails and rotten ties are being replaced with heavy-duty, climate-resilient materials. But the true revolution is in digital oversight. The new railway is being wired with sensors that monitor stress, temperature, and movement in real time. Drones and LiDAR systems conduct daily aerial surveys, creating a constantly updated digital twin of the entire corridor. Artificial intelligence analyzes this data stream to predict weaknesses, a section of track likely to subside in the next thaw, a bridge bearing showing abnormal stress. Allowing for preemptive repair, maintenance ceases to be a frantic reaction to disaster and becomes a calm, scheduled science. This technological armor is what grants the railway the reliability that global shippers demand. It tells companies that this is not a seasonal backroad, but a permanent, premier trade highway. With the physical and digital foundation being laid, the economic logic becomes irresistible. The Arctic Gateway Group, now backed by serious public investment, is aggressively marketing the corridor's advantages. The math is simple. For a Saskatchewan grain company shipping to Belgium, the route via Churchill is hundreds of miles shorter than the path through Vancouver or the United States. Shorter distance means lower shipping costs, faster delivery times, and no exposure to American rail congestion or port fees. The same holds true for potash, the potassium-rich fertilizer where Canada is the world's dominant supplier. For decades, this vital commodity has been forced onto American networks. Now, companies like Nutrien can load unit trains in Saskatoon and send them straight north to a ship bound for Brazil or India, completely avoiding the U.S. bottleneck. The most strategically significant cargo, however, may be critical minerals. Northern Canada is sitting on a treasure trove of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements, the building blocks of the green energy future. Establishing a secure, sovereign supply chain for these materials is a top priority for allies in Europe and Asia who wish to reduce their dependence on China. The Hudson Bay Corridor offers a direct, friendly nation route from Canadian mine to European factory. Arctic Gateway has already proven the concept, completing trial shipments of minerals to Europe for 2 consecutive seasons. The ambition stretches even further. Vision plans under the Port of Churchill Plus banner envision the site evolving beyond a bulk commodity terminal. It could become an export hub for liquefied natural gas or hydrogen from Alberta and Saskatchewan, shipped directly to energy-hungry Europe. It could support massive green energy projects, bringing in components for northern wind farms and transmitting power south. Each of these possibilities relies on the heavy lift capacity of a Class 1 railway to move immense transformers, turbine blades, and construction modules, something the old line could never do. The implications for the United States are severe but subtle. American railroad giants like BNSF and Canadian Pacific Kansas City, CPKC, which have profited handsomely from carrying Canadian exports south, now face the prospect of losing a significant portion of that traffic. American port authorities in the Pacific Northwest and the Great Lakes, who have handled Canadian grain and potash for generations, will see volumes decline. This is not a sudden, overnight blockade. It is a slow, deliberate diversion. As the Churchill Corridor proves its reliability and cost competitiveness, more and more Canadian exporters will make the rational business choice to use it. The leverage the U.S. once held by controlling the gateways is evaporating. Canada is building its own gate. For the community of Churchill and the Indigenous-led Arctic Gateway Group, this is more than an economic project. It is a redemption story. It is about turning a symbol of neglect into an engine of prosperity and sovereignty. For Prime Minister Carney, it is a masterstroke of realpolitik. It answers Trump's tariff threats not with angry words, but with concrete action. It provides the tangible infrastructure needed to make his promises of trade diversification with India, Europe, and beyond a reality. A farmer in Manitoba can now realistically sell to a mill in Germany without ever involving an American middleman. This is the very definition of economic independence. The $262 million investment is not an end, it is a down payment. It is Canada buying back its own future, one steel rail at a time. The Hudson Bay Railway is no longer a cautionary tale. It is now Canada's newest and perhaps most potent answer to American pressure. It is the sound of a nation quietly laying its own tracks to freedom, and in the process, leaving a superpower wondering how it failed to see the threat emerging from the frozen north.